The movie opens with several women, ceremonially dressed, hiking through a mountain trail. Upon reaching the top of a waterfall, they begin falling to their deaths one after another. However, this doesn't seem to be a deliberate act, as it is revealed that someone else is controlling their actions from a different location. The story then shifts to Lagos, where we are introduced to a cheerful family of four: the father, Adedunjoye, his wife, Amaka, and their two children, Fola and Tade. This family embodies love in everything they do, even in their playful competitions. As a mixed ethnicity family, Adedunjoye and Amaka rise above tribal differences, firmly believing that they were created by God out of love and to share that love. Please bear with me. For convenience, I'll be pronouncing Adedunjoye as Ade. And before we get back to the recap, please do well to like the video as it helps the algorithm. The movie then transitions to a community called Ilara, a place seemingly devoid of love. For the past 3 years, the community has been without a king following the last king's death, leaving its governance in the hands of 4 chiefs. However, 3 of these chiefs have succumbed to greed, exploiting their position to unlawfully seize land. They go to the extent of demolishing houses to sell their reclaimed land for their own profit. In the absence of a king, the chiefs assumed unchecked power, acting as though they were monarchs. Their victims could do little more than threaten them with the law, an authority the chiefs refused to recognize. Those who turned to the gods for justice fared no better. They were killed instead. It seemed as though the chiefs had even gained the favor of the gods themselves. The son of one of their victims, whose house was demolished, Wale, happens to be a close friend of Ade. Hailing from the same community, Wale returns to Lagos and shares with Ade the troubling events unfolding in their hometown. Discussions about the installment of a new king had been ongoing for some time, with Prince Adeoye, the late king's son, eagerly eyeing the throne. Determined to claim it, he attempts to win over the chiefs with lavish dinners and women. However, when the priest consulted the gods, Ifa, the verdict was unexpected. The kingship was destined for the house of Adegobe, which belongs to Ade's lineage. When Ade's uncles approached him about the kingship, he firmly declined, suggesting they offer it to another family instead. Meanwhile, the chiefs continued to accept lavish gifts and bribes from Prince Adeoye, assuring him the throne was his, despite the clear declaration from Ifa. Amaka, convinced her husband would make an excellent king, urged him to reconsider. Ade hesitated, knowing such a position would distance him from the family he cherished deeply. After realizing his family fully supported him and would stand by his side, he finally agreed to accept the role of a king. Ade and his family were warmly welcomed into the community with praises and joy. Meanwhile, the priest sought to reconfirm the god's choice of Ade as king. He consulted the deity Agagu, known to accept only cockerel as sacrifice, and was reassured when the deity affirmed Ade as the rightful king. However, the chiefs tried one more time to drag their legs with the initiates or kingmakers, who were tasked with performing several rites. But then, the woman who made the last chief wasn't on their side. Ade was then led to a sacred house, where kings before him had undergone series of important rituals. First, he was shown the deities of Ilara, beginning with the 7th one known as the staff. He was given a stern warning never to look at it again, as doing so could lead to his death. Next, he was shown the statues of the first dancer, drummer, and orator who had served Ilara's first king. Finally, Ade was taken to a room where he was instructed to sleep on his right side. He was also warned never to reveal anything he saw in the room to anyone, as doing so would breach the sacred tradition. These rites were crucial steps in his journey to becoming the king of Ilara. This rites of passage was what these devious chiefs were counting on. His failure would mean his death and the opportunity to enthrone the prince. According to tradition, if the statues of the first drummer, orator, and the dancer sang your praises and you could hear them, it signified that you had passed the first ritual. Ade successfully passed the test and was sent to another room where he was required to sleep on his left side. During this ritual, he wrestled with death itself and emerged victorious, proving beyond doubt that he was a true son of the land. The final ritual was an extraordinary one. Death and curses were collected and offered to an evil spirit that accepted no other form of worship. This spirit was believed to absorb the confusion and troubles of Ilara, carrying them away from the community and restoring harmony to the land. With the conclusion of the final ritual, Ifa issued a directive for the new king to knock on 7 doors, symbolizing the need to marry 6 additional wives in order to enjoy a fruitful and peaceful reign. However, this was not a strict requirement for him to ascend the throne. Soon after, Ade was coronated as the Oni Ilara, the king of Ilara. During the celebration, the disgruntled chiefs made one last attempt to embarrass him by criticizing his wife Amaka for speaking English during her address, but she quickly silenced them by switching to fluent Yoruba, gaining admiration from the crowd. The festivities continued, filled with joy and relief as the people celebrated their liberation from the oppressive rule of the chiefs, making the dawn of a new era for Ilara. But the old habits of the chiefs were hard to kill. They continued their illegal land grabbing practices, even targeting lands that had been in families for generations. When news of this reached the king, he made a firm declaration, ordering them to cease all unlawful activities, including land seizures and reselling. With their primary source of income cut off, the chief's lives grew increasingly difficult. In his frustration, the prince sent his thugs to capture the chiefs and subjected them to brutal torture for their failure to secure his ascension to the throne. Despite the setbacks, one of the chiefs, Otun, refused to change his ways. He secretly instructed a thug known as Asakoko and his boys to disrupt operations on a developing property. Posing as though they were acting independently, the thugs confronted the contractor, who presented valid documents proving ownership. Ignoring the evidence, they gruesomely injured his head, destroyed his car, and chased away all the workers. The king maintained his friendship with Wale and went as far as rebuilding Wale's father's destroyed home. Grateful for this act of kindness, Wale's father, Agumbiade, visited the king to express his heartfelt appreciation. Not long after, the king learned of the violent incident involving Asakuku boys. Taking swift action, he summoned the DPO of the community to investigate the matter. After reviewing the documents of the buyers and sellers, it was revealed that all their papers were legitimate, while Asakuku boys had no documentation to support their claims. The king ordered the DPO to arrest all members of the gang and instructed that they remain in custody until they compensated the victims for all damages, including hospital bills. Otun's son is part of the boys and he pleads with the DPO for him not to arrest him. One night, the king had a strange dream. A man carrying a pile of dirt and trash came to the palace and tried to leave it there. The king refused, saying it was forbidden, but the man said the burden wasn't his to carry. The king woke up suddenly, confused and unable to understand what the dream meant. Later, while hosting a business meeting with some Hausa investors interested in the community, the king witnessed something strange. He saw an entity moving across the room, but his guests remained oblivious to it. Alarmed, the king watched as the entity make its way to Fola's room. Inside, chaos ensued as the entity tossed objects around violently. Fola's terrified screams echoed through the palace as the entity hurled her against the wall. Tragically, she struck her head, leading to her untimely death. The king was heartbroken but couldn't see her body because it was against tradition for a king to look at dead body. This left the palace in deep sorrow and the king was filled with pain. While the palace mourned the death of a child, the parents mourned the loss of a beloved daughter. The entity behind the death was yet to be identified, but Otun believes it was a payback for the king embarrassing them, the chiefs. At the king's lowest point, the chiefs and the prince began plotting another way to unseat him. The title of the staff, the one the king shouldn't set eyes on again, has been a position that hasn't been filled for a long time too. And what they planned to do was to awaken the family of the staff. The prince bought into the idea, even bailing out Asakuku and his boys in case he would need their services later, while embarrassing Otto in the process. Two stones, I guess. The calamity they thought would just be the king's to bear befell on the entire town. An accident caused logs of wood to kill several people, even Otun's only daughter, who was on her way back from school. The whole of Ilara mourned the loss of their loved ones, with just a few knowing the root cause of the calamity. One of the kingmakers whose child got killed confronts the king as he's yet to knock on the 7 doors, which has been the cause all along. All the other ways the king had used to appease Agagu, the deity had failed, and the priest reminds him he must knock on the 7 doors. This was impossible for him to make, being from a monogamous household, and the connection between marrying more wives and the plights of Ilara town wasn't adding up. So the priest began to tell him the tales of his forefather who forcefully became the king of Ilara. Back then, the Ifa had chosen 2 brothers to be the king as they were equally fit. However, they had to come to an agreement between themselves for who was going to ascend the throne. That was when one named Adedunjoye decided to kill the other and ascended the throne. He passed all the rituals and the first dancer, first orator, and the first drummer sang his praises. However, his reign would end when he gets to 50 years and he would die, which means he had only 5 years to rule from his current age. Throughout his 4 years as king, he tried everything to change his destiny, but nothing worked. Then one day, he heard about a man named Isuzu, a powerful but cruel individual known for his bad temper and constant anger. The king immediately got on his way to find this man in the forest. He found his slayer and got inside. He passed some dead bodies while carefully covering his gaze from them. He then made it into the second layer where he then came face to face with Isuzu. Isuzu agreed to avert his death but demands the king bring him back from his banishment, and the king agreed to even make him not just any citizen but one that lived like a king. Isuzu then consulted his oracle and informed the king that the 7 doors he knocked on had to die. That is, his 7 wives would die and their ages would be added to his, but he declined and left. But after a short consideration with hunger and sleepless nights, he finally agreed to do the rituals to extend his life. In the spirit realm, his wives were over a cliff as Isuzu directs them. When he mentions their names, they fall over and die whilst dying in the physical world also. When they all had died, the king drinks a red liquid which finalizes the ritual. On arrival, the high priest could see this condemnable and despicable act was an extension of the king's life and confronts him. He demanded the king tell everyone with his mouth what he had done, if not he would. And well, the king had him assassinated on his way. The king lived the 50 years and then got terribly sick. No healer far or near could heal him. It got bad that he started searching for death, even looking at the forbidden stuff and ingesting poisons, but none could do the work. While they relentlessly sought ways to heal him, Isuzu was back in the town and like promised, he was treated like a king with food and never-ending praises. The king lived a very long and miserable life that they had to bring him out to the sun every day so maggots did not infest his body. He had to watch all his children die and only being cared for by his aging grandchildren. Before he died at 170 years, he confessed all the evil he had done to his grandchildren, and one of their descendants is where Ade comes from. The high priest revealed to him that there had been 2 other kings before him, but neither lived long. He explained that the chiefs had treated those kings the same way they now treated him. Their greed and selfishness had prevented them from choosing a proper king for many years. The high priest concludes by saying the women he was asked to marry were to appease the ones his forefather murdered, and that the other 2 kings couldn't have solved the problem since they weren't in his household. The burden since becoming a king had been so much. He had lost a child and now asked to take 6 more wives, but then it wasn't a decision he had to make alone. His wife Amaka refused, suggesting they left the palace, but then the kingship was still dead. He begged and appeased the deity, but all his pleas went unheard. Meanwhile, the priest went to the family of the staff to ask them to sell their staff to him since they just had it locked up, not realizing its true potential. However, they refused, thinking he just wanted to sell it to foreigners or worse, put it in a museum where they will have to pay to see it. At the same time, the king, overwhelmed by his troubles and desperate for a solution, nearly lost his sanity when he almost went out naked before his wife stopped him. After seeing him in this state, she agreed to support him on the condition he doesn't forget her and all they've been through. Meanwhile, since the prince couldn't buy the staff, he found another way to get what he wanted. He managed to convince the family that owned the staff to take the title of the staff instead. He urged them to go to court if the only Ilara contested their claim, hoping to create further chaos and undermine the king's authority. A grand ceremony was held as the king took his 6 new wives, but neither he nor Amaka were happy during the event. The weight of the situation was too much for Amaka to bear and she couldn't sit through the entire ceremony. Feeling the tension, she left and the king, unable to bear the thought of losing her, followed her. He dropped his staff and removed his crown and begs her, not as a king but as her husband, for her support. It was a hard promise and she did her best to stomach the disrespect and ill behavior from the other wives. They saw her as the enemy since the king wouldn't sleep with them or love them wholeheartedly. While the kingdom may be divided, the palace wasn't peaceful either, which troubled him more. Amidst all this, the dispute over the title of the staff continued. The king eventually decided to let the family take the title, but he insisted that they must not make a loud or exaggerated celebration out of it. His troublesome wives later apologized to him, but they were neither organized, coherent, or well-mannered. The title of the staff was given to Opayemi in a ceremony, and he was given the rules of the staff. No one aside him must touch it. He mustn't be a liar, a wicked person, or a betrayal, and he must use the staff to bring ease to the town. After the ceremony, the king carries out his chieftaincy coronation, but before he proceeded, Amaka notified him that the other wives were preparing to join them, and he sends a guard to lock them out. Notwithstanding, they banged on the door, causing distraction. He tried to remain patient with them like the priest suggested, but he had the last straw when they poured oil on Amaka on their way out. Since he wasn't going to bend to their demands for an equality, he took back the royal necklace he had given to all of them and sent them out, back to their parents' houses. In the meantime, the prince gives Opayemi an expensive car and demands he takes the staff to the king's palace, knowing what it would do to him. Opayemi, in his aesthetic mood, agrees. Someone got wind of their plans and tells Wale's father, Agumbiade, who then goes to warn the king. But then, the guards wouldn't let him since the king was already asleep. Wale's father sleeps outside the palace that night, and the next morning, he informs the king, but it was already too late. Opayemi, who had disregarded the warnings of his parents, was already in the palace. Wale's father stops him, even collecting the staff from him, and immediately they paid the price. Opayemi suffers a stroke while Wale's father eventually dies, but that only appears to be the resurrection of the king's problems. He sees the evil entity again, and he knew trouble wasn't too far from it. The community came to the palace in their crowds to express their grievances. Only this time they've had enough of his reign. The evil entity appears again, but this time it came to take the king's son that day. After hearing the boy scream and finding him unconscious, they brought him to the hospital. The king knew better that the hospital couldn't help as he saw Tade drifting away from life in his sleep. The high priest came to the hospital and took the king aside, informing him the hospital was useless in that situation and they carried him home before it gets too late. They had the boy on a white mat, encircled by candles and people making chants, while the priest made incantations calling Tade back to life. The boy awoke and the king immediately snatched him. Later, the priest informed him that the sieve was only temporary and that he should recall the 6 wives he sent away and love them wholeheartedly, and that would serve as his deliverance. And he did recall them. To their surprise, he welcomed each one of them with a big hug. If this was all it would take to save his family and the kingdom, he was willing to do it. He made a change and loved them wholeheartedly, and when he thought he was succeeding after giving it his all, he sees the evil entity again. He was ready to give up being the king now, but it was till death. The high priest was withholding information about the root of the problem, as it's a battle he must fight, a battle with Isuzu, the deity. He then begins to tell the story how things ended with Isuzu and the king Adedunjoye. After the king fell sick and found out Isuzu had betrayed him and refused to kill him, he revealed the whole truth to his chiefs and that he blamed himself and not Isuzu. However, Isuzu must leave so that the town will see prosperity. So these chiefs went to Isuzu with a masquerade and a priestess. Due to Isuzu overestimating his powers, the priestess destabilized him and they captured and brought him to the king. He gave the final word that he'd be driven out of the town with all the calamities and problems of the town, and as they did, the townspeople put all their waste and trash on him. His home was also scattered and destroyed. They managed to bring him to the border of the community, and then Isuzu decided not to leave. He promised suffering on not just the king and Ilara town, but those who would come after them before conjuring into a deity. All that is left now was for the king to battle it out with Isuzu. After he had prepared and was ready, the Yoruba priest and the Igbo priest fortified him, as he would need all the fortification he could get to face this ancient long deity. He caused on Isuzu and soon it resurrected and they began their battle. It was an intense fight for the king and he got disadvantaged when Isuzu dragged them underground. The king had to call his forefather Adekobe, who came to him and handed him a gun. He shoots Isuzu's running mouth shut for good, and then the king gets expelled above ground. He had battled the deity and won. Jubilation and joy filled the air, but the only one he always had his eyes for was already in his arms. Moral lesson of this movie: please don't be a king.